الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So this evening I just wanted to go over some of the rulings of Ramadan. People have been asking, questions have been coming up, so I thought it'd be good to clarify this evening as we are concluding this month of Ramadan. Obviously tomorrow, as we heard, will be the day of Eid. And so people have been asking about Zakat al-Fitr, Qada fasting if you missed, Fidya, Kafara, so on and so forth. So I want to just go over these rulings with us this evening. I'm going to begin first with the definition of all of these four terms, and then we'll go over into some of the specifics of them. So Zakat al-Fitr literally is what I will call, it's not a legal term, but it's what I call a post-Ramadan tax. And it is approximately 3 kilograms of certain food items, and I'll go into the specifics of what they are. So that's the first off, is Zakat al-Fitr is a tax which is applicable on us after the month of Ramadan has completed. And it's important to note that description. What is qada? Qada literally means to make up the item. In our case, we're talking about fasting, and it's on a 1-to-1 ratio. So one fast missed is one fast which has to be made up. So that's the basic definition of a qada. Fidya, and this is where it gets a bit more detailed. A fidya basically is not a penalty. Some people translate it as penalty. It's not a penalty, it's a compensation. And it's a recompense for one who was not able to fast for a legitimate reason. So sometimes we get the kafara and fidya mixed up. Fidya is only for those who were not able to fast for a legal reason. They're long-term medical patients, let's say they're heart patients, diabetic patient, you're on constant medication, you cannot fast because of a valid legal reason. A fidya is what is applicable to those individuals. And the amount is, for every day of missed fasting, we'll go into the specifics, but generally speaking, it's 750 grams of rice or flour for every day that you don't fast, that you cannot fast. But it's better, it's recommended, it's mustahab in the hadith to give double that amount. So if you do the math, 30 days times 750 grams, and it's just under around 25 kilos, I believe, is the amount. But it's better to give double if you can. I'll go into the specifics of that later. And the kafara. So a kafara is actually a penalty. A penalty is applicable when you intentionally break Allah's rules. So a fidya was where you're not able to fast. A kafara is where you know that you have to fast, but you willfully break the rules of Allah. The kafara is a triple penalty. 3 strikes and you're out, basically. You got to do all 3. Free a slave, but we know that in today's day and age, we don't have slaves in the context of the Quran. We have modern slavery, people that work in sweatshops, but that doesn't fall in this category. So that part of the penalty is not applicable to us in our current era. But the other 2 are very much applicable. So a part of the kafara is to fast 2 months, 31 days straight. And if you miss a day, you have to start from scratch again. And then the other 30 days can be staggered out amongst the next months. And you have to feed 60 people. Feeding meaning 750 grams of food, wheat, barley, rice, for every fast broken. So that's 45 kilograms for every broken fast. And I think when we did the math for somebody, it was around $300 per fast if you intentionally break a fast. So that's $9,000 for a month, I think, if my math is right. $9,000. If somebody really broke the law of Ramadan and broke their fast every day, it's about a $9,000 penalty you have to pay. But we'll go into the specifics of that. So Zakat al-Fitr. Zakat al-Fitr is payable by the head of the household. It could be the father, the husband, it could be the wife, whoever is really the bread earner, whoever is running the house, so to speak. It becomes an obligation, wajib, on us tonight at sunset. So once Maghrib hits at 10:30 or so tonight, This is when zakat al-fitr becomes wajib upon us to pay. The head of the house who is paying it, he has to be adult, obviously, which is over the age of baligh in Islam, conscious and sane. So if the head of the household is insane, he's in a, not in a mental state, zakat al-fitr is not obviously wajib on him or for him to pay. If person is in a coma, unconscious in the hospital, but he's the head of the household, zakat al-fitr would not be wajib on him or for the family to pay. It's required to pay it on all of your dependents, whether they live at home or they live elsewhere. So sometimes we'll have examples where the father and mother live at home and their children are, let's say, off at university studying, or they've gone to summer camp, right? And they're not home on the night of Eid. So the people have to be at the home in the night of Eid. So let's say your children have gone to summer camp out of town. You're still obliged to pay zakat al-fitr for them. Let's say your children are dependent on you, but they're at university and they're out of town. And if they're considered as a dependent on the parents, then the head of the house would pay their zakat. If they're independent, they're on their own, let's say they're not dependent on the family, then they take care of their own zakat al-fitr. But as long as they are deemed as in the family unit as being dependent on the family, that zakat al-fitr is an obligation on the head of the household to pay for that individual. This also applies to people that might come as a guest to your house tonight. Now, it's not that they come over and pass over some food from the door and they run away. You don't have to pay for them. But if you have somebody that comes over and stays with you for, let's say, a day or two, maybe you have family from out of town, they came to celebrate Eid with you, your son, your daughter, relatives, uncles, whatever, and they're staying at home and they're considered as living under that roof for night of Eid and whatever, a day or even 2 days after, they are deemed in the religion as dependents, and so the head of the house needs to pay their zakat al-fitr as well. It's, as I mentioned, 3 kilograms of rice, flour, dates, raisins, barley. The ulama give us those 4 or 5 things. You can either give the actual commodity, although I don't think the Jamaat would like us to bring dates and raisins tomorrow and bags of flour to the center. But theoretically, if you wanted to bring 3 kilograms of flour tomorrow for zakat al-fitr, you could bring it and give it to the brother treasurer and he would have to accept it. But I don't advise you to bring that, so don't do that, please. Give the money, give the cash. And these are the rates I calculated as of June 20th. So just a few days ago, I went around to the stores and looked around to see an approximate price of 3 kilograms. So keep in mind that we should be paying on what we normally eat at home. If you eat a lot of bread and roti, you're using a lot of flour, then it's $10 per person. But if you find that you eat more rice during the year, and maybe we eat more rice than bread at home, then you should be basing it on $12. If you eat a lot of barley, for example, it's 14. Dates are pretty expensive, 3 kilos of dates, and this is an average quality date. It's not like top of the line. That was $20. Otherwise, dates can go up to about 40 or 50 for 3 kilos if you look at the high quality ones. And raisins, surprisingly, were the most expensive, about $21. So the Jamaat and the Simco and these organizations, they set an amount of $10, but all of us should really base it on what we normally eat at home. If we're eating more, again, rice, then, keep in mind this is going to the poor people anyways. So an extra $5 or $10 is just going to fill the stomach of a needy person. And obviously we're fulfilling our obligation by ensuring that we give what we eat normally at home. How, when, and to who. So first off, we cannot take out zakat al-fitr before the day of Eid. We have this tradition in our community, I don't know where it came from, that before, the first day of Ramadan, we take out our zakat al-fitr and send it overseas. This has no basis in our Sharia. Somebody came up with this idea, concocted this thing to take it out early in the month and then send it overseas. But it has no basis really within our teachings. So it has to be taken out on the night of Eid, for sure. If you want to take it out before the day of Eid, you can take it out and give it to somebody as a loan. So let's say a family and 4 or 5 of you get together and you collect, let's say, $300. You give it to the person. your intention is that it's a loan. It's not zakat al-fitr. It's a loan you're giving to them. On the night of Eid, you turn around, your intention changes, that loan I gave is not a loan, it actually is my zakat al-fitr I'm paying. But the point is that it should be taken out at the night. Right? Again, we have this notion that we should give it before the day of Eid. There is nothing in our religion that says it should reach the needy on the day of Eid. It should reach them as soon as possible, right? But it's not necessarily that immediately after you pray, that the needy have it in their hands. The Maraja, including Ayatul Sistani, say that you cannot take zakat al-fitr out of your city as long as there are needy people who have not been taken to account of. Right. So if there are needy people in Edmonton, we as a community, as individuals, should not be sending it overseas. It has to stay within our community. Take care of our own people first. Those people can take care of themselves. They have other ways and means, I'm sure, to do it. And we have other funds which we help other people around the world for. But this is one of those, I don't want to call it a tax, but it's one form of a payment that we give to take care of our own community members first and foremost. If you are coming tomorrow for Salatul Eid here or wherever you're praying in Jamaat, you need to make sure that money is out of your hands before you begin the prayers. So there are boxes set up. I'm sure you can give it tonight after Maghrib when you leave the center. If not, then tomorrow morning before you actually begin the prayers, that money should be out of your hands and into, whether it's online on the Jamaat website or in a box or something, that money is not with you. If you're not performing the salat, if you can't make it for school, for work reasons, whatever, you can delay until Dhuhr time to have that money released from you, but obviously you should ensure that it gets to the needy as soon as possible. Who is a needy person? I'll just mention a few points. Is that first of all, the needy person must be a Shia Ithna Ashari. It cannot go to any other Muslims. Any other Muslims that are out there, they may be needy, but this specific zakat al-fitr, the first and foremost priority is Shia Ithna Ashari believers. They cannot be open sinners. So somebody who openly drinks alcohol, who does sins in the open, they are not allowed to take this money and we should not give it to them. Again, we can use other means if we have to help, but not this particular fund. And the definition of a needy, because people say, well, we don't have needy people in Canada. The definition of a needy is somebody whose minimal legitimate expenses are more than what they earn in a year. Right? So I'm not talking about people who have an exorbitant mortgage and who shop a lot and go to excesses in shopping, but somebody who's making an average income, or maybe somebody right now who's unemployed and they don't have a job, right? And they have mortgage, they have bills to pay. Right? These are the kind of people that we might not deem them to be needy. We may think, well, somebody in, I don't know, Bangladesh is needy. Well, they are needy, but in the definition of the Islam, a needy person is somebody who cannot meet their minimal yearly expenses. So with that definition, it does mean that there are many people within our local community as well who would be deserving of it, obviously on a priority basis. Let me go now to the rules of the qadha, the fidya, and the kafara. And we'll just go over them. If you have any questions, we can address them, but this chart basically provides us the details in a nutshell. So, as an example, for the first row, for an elderly person who did not fast in Ramadan, they don't have to offer the qadha because let's say you're 60, 70, 80, you just can't fast. Physically, you can't do it. You don't have to offer the qadha. There is the fidya, which I mentioned, that feeding that 750 grams per day. So the fidya is applicable on that person, and there is no kafara, because a kafara is if you did something intentionally to break, and they didn't do it, but they just physically cannot fast. So elderly people, and they have to judge themselves, and maybe in tandem with their medical practitioner, can they fast or can't they? But they, each of us knows ourselves where we're at, and if we can and cannot fast. Elderly people just have a fidya to offer. People who have a temporary illness, maybe you fell sick in the month of Ramadan, you had a fever, you had bad sinuses, you had some problem, you are on medication. Obviously the qadha has to be done within 1 year. So if you missed 5 fasts this Ramadan, we need to make sure that they're made up before next year Ramadan. So you have a whole year to make up those missed fasts. So qadha is always there for that group. If you don't perform the qadha before next Ramadan, then you also have to pay the fidya. Right? So that's a clear point to mention, to note, is that make sure if you missed any Ramadan fast this year, you make them up before next year, right? And that way you don't have to give the fidya, because then you have to feed the poor people if you have not able to make it up. And again, there's no kafara, because if you were sick, temporary illness, it's obviously, Allah allows that as a valid excuse to not fast. And that, again, that is dependent on each and every person. You have to determine that yourself. Long-term illnesses, people who know they can never fast, right? People who are, let's say, diabetes patients, and they know that they have to always be on medication, or they have to always be eating every few hours. You know, you have some people who are type 2 diabetes, let's say, who they can skip the meals, they can take their medication, and they can control their blood sugar. For them, obviously, they would have a different scale. But if you are on a long-term illness, maybe you're a heart patient, you're always on medication, or you constantly have to eat, you have some medical condition, you never have to make up the qadha. Right? If you can, okay, but if you know that you're never going to be able to, then there's no qadha on you. But Allah does say that you need to give the fidya, and that should be given after the start of the next Ramadan. So you wouldn't give it now or 2 or 3 months, but next year when next Ramadan starts, you would make sure that that money, that food is given to its rightful, the people who are rightfully deserving of it. And for them, there is no kafara, because again, there is no penalty on them. They are not able to fast because of their own health reasons. It's not it's something they can't control. Women who are pregnant and they are told by their doctor that they cannot fast because of the health of the baby, and again, they will be able to judge that best. They have the qadha they have to give, obviously, once they're able to make up those fasts. The fidya would also be there for the mother, and there is no kafara. And that same also goes for a mother who is nursing a child, that she, if she feels that fasting would diminish the milk supply, that the child would not be nourished, then she would not fast. She would offer the qadha later on, and the fidya also would be there for her as well. And again, no kafara in that case of the nursing mother as well. The next chart sort of combines fasting and traveling, and also if you have to give the qadha or not. So it's obviously, we know that when we travel and we are less than 10 days and we're more than 40 kilometers one way out of our city, and if we leave before dhuhr, we do not fast. It's actually haram to fast, and we pray our namaz in qasr, in the shortened form. So if a person was leaving home, so if you were traveling in the month of Ramadan, you left before dhuhr from home, let's say, just as an example, you're going from Edmonton to Red Deer, obviously more than the 44 kilometers one way, it's about 150, I think. You left at 9 a.m., you knew you weren't coming back to Edmonton, you obviously wouldn't be back before dhuhr time, before 1:30, you would just offer the qadha because you broke that one fast. There is no fidya and there is no kafara. So you just make up that fast you missed before next Ramadan. If you left Edmonton though before or after dhuhr, so 1:30 was dhuhr time, you prayed dhuhr, or even if you didn't pray but you were in Edmonton at the time the adhan would have gone on, you left at say 2 o'clock going to Red Deer, you would continue to fast because you've left after dhuhr. So the criteria in Islam is being in your hometown or in the boundaries of your city at the time of dhuhr. If you're within the boundaries of Edmonton, and if you go to the City of Edmonton map, the City of Edmonton website, they have a map where they delineate the boundaries of where Edmonton begins and ends. If you're within that boundary after the time of dhuhr and you're leaving after, then you have to continue to fast. So obviously there's no issue of a qadha or a fidya or kafara, you are fasting in that time. If you get to your destination, you get to Red Deer, and let's say you're there for less than 10 days, you're there for a day or two, you come back to Edmonton, you just have to make up the qadha, those missed fasts that you missed while you're on the journey. The fidya is not there and there's no kafara in that instance. If you are in that destination, Red Deer, for 10 days or more, obviously you are fasting, so you leave Edmonton, you know that you're going for a 10-day meeting for business, so your intention is you're traveling, you're going to be there 10 days or more. You fast for that entire time that you're there, and your prayers would be full as well. Somebody who was willfully negligent, meaning that they just didn't care about the rules. They didn't care to learn, they didn't care to follow them. But then later on they decide, you know what, I need to go back and pay what I did, what I broke, a fast that they intentionally broke. They have to give the qadha, which is the one-to-one fast. There's no fidya, but there is the kafara, which we talked about, the three-pronged kafara. We mentioned that the slavery is no longer applicable, but the other two are there. So fasting for 60 days for every intentional fast broken, and to feed 60 people their full. This explains the qadha and the kafara in a bit more detail. So there's about 8 different things in terms of the qadha or kafara. Somebody intentionally eats or drinks in the month of Ramadan, the qadha, they have to do the one-to-one, and there is the kafara. So as we say, if you were to break your fast in Ramadan, eating something haram, you went and grabbed a burger from McDonald's, for example, or you drank some alcohol, na'udhu billah, something haram you did. You have to free the slave, which as we said is not applicable anymore. You have to fast 30 days or feed 60 Shias. Or it's recommended rather to do all 3 if possible. Last year we had mentioned and. There is actually a ruling change from Ayatul Sistani. He's changed it to or. So you have an option to either fast 60 days, as you mentioned, 31 consecutive, and then another month broken up, or to feed 60 people. That's if you break with haram. And it's better to combine all of them. And if you broke your fast with something halal, so you ate something permissible, again, you have the option, either the 60-day fasting or to feed 60 people. Second one, intercourse with your spouse, hopefully, because if it's the other one, if it's haram, adultery, it's a penalty. You have the qadha to do and also a kafara. If it's in a haram way, adultery or with your wife when it was not permissible with her, again, there's an option. You have to do either the fasting or feeding 60 Shias. Recommended to combine both of these if possible. And if it's in a legal way with your legal spouse, then it's the option as well of either fasting 60 days or feeding 60 people. Masturbation, same thing, is the qadha and a kafara is there, fasting 60 days and feeding 60 people. Better to combine both of the penalties if you have performed that action. And if you lied against Allah, month of Ramadan, you're fasting, you made up a verse of the Quran. You say, Allah says this in the Quran, or Rasulullah said this hadith, or Imam Hussein said this hadith. And you intentionally attributed a lie to Allah, the Prophet, Lady Zahra, or one of the 12 Imams. So you know that they didn't say something, but you make it up to win an argument, to, beat somebody at something. It's recommended to fulfill the penalty also, to fast 60 days or to feed 60 Shias. And there is a qadha for that, obviously, because your fast is nullified. Your fast is null and void if you did that in the month of Ramadan. And the kafara is a recommendation to do in that case. But you do have to make that fast up. The last few, and we'll conclude, we'll have a few minutes if there's any questions, because we still have about 25 minutes till Maghrib time, is if you cause thick dust to reach to your throat. Now this is always a confusing one because people say, what do you mean by thick dust? Maybe you're, for example, people who smoke and who inhale the smoke and they take it all the way down, right, into their lungs. That is an example of having that thick dust or smoke reaching to the throat. Or for example, you're out in the countryside, maybe you're in a field, in a farmer's field or something, and a truck drives by and a lot of dust blows and you inhale that dust. And sometimes you can feel that dust in the back of your throat. If it got to that extent, or you're driving by a construction site in Edmonton on one of these roads and the dust is kicking up and it goes down the throat, that would nullify the fast. It's not food, obviously. Nobody eats dust or dirt, but the fact is that it is gone down the throat, although it's not going to nourish you or sustain you. There is the kafara, the qadha rather, that you have to perform, which is the one-to-one replacement of that fast. And the kafara is just a recommendation. So you recommended to feed 60 or to fast 60 days. Staying in the state of janabat, hayd, or nifas until the time of fajr, and you intentionally did not take the ghusl that you had to perform, qadha is obviously there. And here a kafara is mandatory, right? Because, and obviously if you didn't have water, water was cut to your home, obviously those are all acceptable, reasons. You can do tayammum in those cases. But if you intentionally did not take the ghusl, then again, either the 60-day fasting or feeding of 60 poor Shias. Last two are applying a liquid enema. It invalidates the fast, and you need to do the qadha for that. And the recommendation is to offer the kafara. And last is vomiting. That will invalidate our fast. And the kafara there is recommended. It's not an obligation. But if you want to give it, again, for those last two, it is recommended, not obligation. But you do have to make up that fast if you had vomited. That really covers the rulings I wanted to look at today. If there's any questions, again, we have about 20 minutes still till Maghrib. We can take a few. If not, then we'll have some time to relax before iftar time. Yes?
If you leave your hometown traveling for more than 10 days,
Okay.
and you arrive at your destination before Zohar, and you leave after Fajr,
Okay.
can you still keep fasting?
So the question was, for those who didn't hear that, if you leave your hometown with the intention to travel and be in your destination for more than 10 days, you left in the morning time and you got to your destination before Dhuhr, yes, in that case you would continue fasting. Yeah. Yes. Any other questions? For some, I'll just mention the one point is that the kafara is a pretty hefty penalty, right? Feeding 60 people or fasting 60 days, it is pretty strenuous. We talked about it last night about Allah's rahmat and forgiveness and mercy being there, and obviously for many people, I mean, if you think about it, that amount of paying to feed that many people is pretty difficult for a lot of people, and even fasting that long. So I know they had asked, Ayatul Sistani was directly asked about this, about people who didn't know, right? Especially many times when we're young, we don't really pay attention to the rules. We might learn them in madrasa, but we don't take them too seriously. So they asked Ayatul Sistani, there were youth or there were people who just were very negligent in their youth. They didn't care about it. They didn't really think of the ramifications and repercussions of what they were doing. Now they've gotten a bit wiser and smarter, and they've realized that, I've done a lot of bad in my life. I've missed a lot of fasting. What am I going to do? How am I going to repay, right? Because one fast is 60 days fasting, right? So a whole month of 30, if somebody intentionally missed a whole month of 30 days, 30 days times 60 days is 1,800 days, right? So that's like 5 years of fasting to make up for 1 year. And what if you don't live that long, right? How do you make up? How do you make up that much fasting? It's maybe for many of us humanly impossible, right? And that means you can't fast on the days when it's haram. So you can't fast on the days of Eid. You can't fast on, right? There's a few days in the year you can't fast. So how do you make up that much fasting if you've missed it? And obviously, as we mentioned, that Allah is Arhamar Rahimin. He's the most merciful. He realizes we have shortcomings, weaknesses. And so when Ayatollah Sistani was asked this question, he says, if you really can't do it, you do as much as you can do, and then you just have to ask Allah for forgiveness, right? You just sincerely plead to Allah. I made mistakes when I was in my foolish days, and I didn't think about it. And if you're sincere in that repentance, really that's what Allah is looking for. It's not meant to kill us, right? And make us go to extent of, not being able to survive. We do as much as we can do, right? If we have the ability to do it, obviously we should try and pay back Allah as much as we can. If we can't, we do the maximum that we're able to, humanly possible. And then we spend the rest of our time just asking Allah for forgiveness, right? And doing as much as we can do. Paying that compensation to feed the needy. Whatever other little things that we can do to hopefully make up for whatever we've missed. So although these are the rules in terms of the black and white, but always keep in mind that even in Islam, it's never a black and white rule. There's always shades of gray. There's always compassion that is taken into account in all of these rulings. And many times if you have a unique circumstance, maybe that, is not covered in this presentation, or you have a unique circumstance that isn't mentioned in any books, the best thing to do is to contact your marja directly. You can write to him. Most of our marja, they're online. You can contact them, directly or indirectly via one of their representatives. And most of our major maraja, they have what are known as sort of directly appointed representatives in each country. So for example, in Canada, we have at least one that I know of where he has the right on behalf of the marja to negotiate in terms of payments and penalties, right? So even people say, Khums, I don't have the money to pay. I want to pay, but I can't pay all in one lump sum. You can speak to these kinds of representatives and they can come into a negotiation with you and work out installment plans, for example. They can work with you, with your marja, to make sure that you're able to, fulfill your responsibilities, and that you are obviously, you're not held accountable on the Day of Judgment. So don't just pass it off and say, well, I can't do any of it, so I'm just not going to do anything. Go to that channel of these scholars who are the representation of the maraja in our countries and explain the situation to them. And chances are they can either work with you directly or they can contact the marja on your behalf, explain your situation to them, and hopefully you can come to some amicable terms that they can guide you to what you need to do vis-a-vis Allah to fulfill your responsibility to Allah, and to obviously feel okay in your heart that you have fulfilled your responsibilities. If there's nothing else, there is, yes. Sure. Vomiting, so basically, person who vomits, even if it's intentional or unintentional, the fasting is nullified. So they just have to do the qadha. There's no kafara or fidya for that. Yeah. The fidya the kafara is recommended, but it's not an obligation. But even if it was unintentional vomiting, let's say morning sickness, or somebody just ate something bad, a stomach flu, their fast would be voided, but it's no penalty on them, basically, for that. If there's nothing else, inshallah, we'll conclude now. We have about 15 minutes till Maghrib time, but we ask Allah as we close in these last 15 minutes of the month of Ramadan that we have left with us, that we ask Allah to accept all of our acts of worship that we have performed over these last 30 days and nights. We ask Allah from the bottom of our heart that He accepts all of the tawbah that we have performed in this month of Ramadan. We ask Allah that He, just as we turned to Allah and we did tawbah to Allah, that we ask Allah that He turns back to us in mercy and forgiveness. We ask Allah that He accepts all of our istighfar in this blessed month of Ramadan. That we ask Allah that every verse of the Quran that we read in Ramadan, that we are given the reward and the thawab that He had promised to us, that Rasulullah gave to us in that beautiful sermon in the month of Shawwal, in the month of Sha'ban rather. And we ask Allah that any of those believers who have left this world, and we know many, we had one member of our community, the marhum Hassan Awada, who passed away the day before Ramadan began, for his thawab and for the thawab of all of the people from our families that we have lost, from our community, all of the ulama who have lost their lives. We lost at least 2 maraja within this month of Ramadan, and all of the shuhada who have been killed in the many bombings around the world, including even in the unfortunate bombing, not the bombing, but rather the tanker explosion in Pakistan today. I think over 100 people were killed in a gas explosion. For all of these individuals and all of the people who have lost their lives in this Ramadan and in all the months past, we ask Allah to grant them all paradise, and let us all remember all of them and all of our own marhameen with the Surah Al-Mubarakatul Fatiha. But before that, as-salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.